Well guys, it's finally here, the very first chapter in Kubo's brand new limited run series Burn the Witch. This brand new series is in effect a spin-off of Bleach, but it's telling its own story in a brand new world with completely new characters, and I think that's something we're all very excited for. Unfortunately, this series is only actually going to be 4 chapters long, so far anyway, and for what I read in this first chapter, there already appears to be the potential for a far bigger, much wider reaching story to be told here, so I'm really hoping that Kubo, maybe can be convinced to carry this thing on even further, but for now, this is what we're going to be getting. We've got a month of Burn the Witch, and that means a month of new manga chapter reviews, and I haven't reviewed a chapter on this channel for years, so for the first time in a very long time, it is manga time once again, and let's get into this thing. Before we begin the review, however, guys, you have got me to 20,000 subs, which is a completely absurd number that I never dreamed of reaching. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're in the perfect place for Bleach and Burn the Witch content. Every single week we do brand new videos. We will be doing, obviously, reviews of all the Burn the Witch chapters. We'll probably do character analyses and stuff like that as well. So if you haven't subbed, hit the button now. Also follow me on Twitter and become a part of the wider community. And you can join the Discord as well. And everyone on there just loves Bleach, supports the franchise, and can't wait for the anime to come back. So there's a lot to be excited about currently. And now it's time for Burn the Witch. In many ways, Burn the Witch is quite thematically similar to Bleach. It's about a almost military-esque organization that deals with these spirits, that some of them prey on humans in the real world. In that sense, it is very similar to Bleach, but almost the way it goes about everything else is completely different, which I actually find to be very refreshing. I like that there is that feeling of familiarity with the way the world works, and that allows you to kind of accept that it does actually take place in the same universe as Bleach, even if it's potentially on the complete other side of the world. I like that it's fleshing the world out. I like the world operates in a very similar way. At the end of the day, you have these spiritual creatures, some of them prey on humans, and therefore you have these warriors who deal with them, and I love that. But then I love the fact that the details about that, however, are completely different. Now, while this is technically the first chapter of Burn the Witch, it's actually the second, because there was a special Chapter 0 one-shot released in 2018, which I assume was basically testing the waters for a brand new series by Kubo, basically to see if there was the demand for it, and clearly there was, so now we have Burn the Witch. However, in many respects, after having read this first chapter from front to back, I don't really feel there's a need for you to read Chapter 0 if you haven't done already. I, of course, would recommend it because it's more Burn the Witch content, really well drawn, nice story, good intro to the characters in the world. But for those people who haven't read it, some of this chapter is clearly designed for you. You get all of the kind of insight into dragons, into reverse and front London, into Wingbind, all of that sort of thing is explained in pretty good detail here in Chapter 1 as well. So it's clearly been written from the perspective of, if you haven't read the one-shot, doesn't matter, you'll be fine here with Burn the Witch Chapter 1. And I actually do kind of like that. It makes it accessible to other people as well. And that's another thing I want to point out as well, probably not going to be too relevant on this channel, but if you haven't read Bleach, I don't think that would matter in the slightest. Burn the Witch very much looking to stand alone, although I'm really hoping we get some Bleach cameos in here at some point during its 4-chapter run. But yes, so I find it kind of interesting that the one-shot didn't feel too necessary to me after I read this chapter. I think it does a good job of being a standalone beginning to this story and setting up the world and the events to come. That is also a double-edged sword, however, as I really would have liked this chapter to have gone a little bit further with its story and with its world building than perhaps we actually got. Considering there are only 4 chapters to this story so far, this chapter didn't necessarily use its 57 pages in the best possible way, in my opinion. And it's a tall order. Kubo does actually continue the story from the one-shot. So there are small little tidbits in here that we'll get into later, but it's clearly a follow-on from that. The one-shot is not something that was written and then forgotten about. This does actually follow on from that story. So in some sense, I think you could have maybe done away with the exposition about the world, because it takes up pages, valuable pages as well, and it's already there in the one-shot that Kubo has acknowledged as clearly being a part of this story. So in that sense, I maybe would have liked to have seen him push the story a bit further in this chapter, but that doesn't mean we don't get to see some really interesting plot developments, especially towards the very end of the chapter, which of course we'll get into. Burn the Witch is really interesting in terms of its style when compared to Bleach. Now, nobody's going to say that Kubo doesn't know how to create style. The guy creates some of the most stylish looking characters I've ever seen in a manga. Bleach has one of the best casts of characters, and the same that skill carries over now to Burn the Witch. Every character is visually distinct, every character is interesting, especially later on. I'm so happy with what we get towards the end of this chapter. But yeah, so far I'm absolutely loving this world. Reverse London is interesting, Wingbind is interesting, and all the sort of divisions and stuff that make up essentially the new Gotei 13 have me intrigued so far, which again is why I want more on them. Burn the Witch, especially in the new anime that's coming out in the future, has a sort of strange, fantastical Studio Ghibli kind of feel to it that Bleach never really had. In a sense, Bleach definitely has a more serious and darker tone when you directly compare the two of them. And I know there's not too much Burn the Witch content to go off so far, but especially when you look at the upcoming anime, there really is a whimsical, fantastical tone to it, whereas Bleach was definitely a little bit more straight-laced. I know it was obviously fantastical, but it was a bit more serious about it. So I do kind of, again, find that change in tone quite refreshing. I just hope that there is a deeper, darker story here that Kubo can really build on, rather than it being like an almost episodic thing of these two girls going around beating up dark dragons and saving the day. I hope there's a bit more to it than that, and the end of this chapter would suggest that maybe there is, which again is something I'm really looking forward to. The chapter opens with a really nice double-page colour spread featuring the two main characters, Noel Nihashi and Ninny Spangle, two members of Wingbind's Piper's division. And there's a lot of brand new terminology in this chapter, a lot of new divisions, new character names. Oh boy, those character names are Kubo to the max. I've got to try and remember these names. Like later on, some of them are absolutely absurd, but that's all part of the fun of it. But yeah, the two main characters, Ninny and Noel, love both of their designs. I think the way Ninny is drawn on this colour page in particular is phenomenally cool. Her hair in particular looks awesome. In the background, you've got Balgo, in my opinion, probably the least interesting character in the story so far. Especially if you read the one-shot, there's no development or change anywhere. I don't foresee this character really doing too much. It's very early days, I know, but I think he might just be comic relief. All the way throughout. And then you have Osushi-chan, who's a really cute little dog, dragon sort of hybrid thing. But these seem to be the main characters of the story that we'll be following the whole way through. And I love what Kubo does with the colour page and what he does with the title page afterwards, featuring just Ninny in her human world hoodie attire. Looks really, really awesome. And again, the art is pretty unrivaled, especially when it comes to the characters. But it's interesting to discover that Ninny is actually a celebrity in the real world. She's a member of this apparently really popular girl band called Sessile Die Twice, I think the name was. Really hope that is a Sekiro reference. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. That would be the most random thing I've ever heard, but I would be all down for that. That would be awesome. So she basically starts out trying to escape her rabid fans and the press. And she does so using a couple of really cool gadgets. She gets out her phone and creates a massive blinding flash, from what I assume is the camera or something, to get away from these guys. And then she has this small token that looks a bit like a coin, which she can then use almost like a QR code reader to open a hole in the floor. None of it makes sense, but Kubo's going completely mad with this sort of thing. And again, I kind of like that, really emphasizing the magical quality of the world of Reverse London. I think it's really cool. And of course, for me, seeing Kubo draw London itself is kind of surreal. I definitely never expected any kind of Bleach-related content to be set in London, but, that's really neat. And it does actually do that. If you hold up a coin in front of your phone, the floor will literally fall away in front of you. That is very real. Afterwards, we then get to see Noel doing what she was doing in the last chapter, where she's trying to essentially subdue a dragon. And it's the Piper's Division's job to make sure that these dragons are kind of safely harvested, because a lot of them can be used for, they produce different resources, whether that's meat, some of them produce energy, some of them produce electricity, some of them produce steel and stuff like that. All of these dragons have very valuable resources that the Wingbind guys collect if you're in the Piper's division. Anyway, Noel is actually trying to harvest this dragon known as a bud buck. It's essentially like a big kind of antelope with where the antlers will turn into flowers when it starts using its magic, which I think was pretty cool. And much in the same way as in the one-shot, Kubo really exercises creativity over these dragon designs in a way that he never really did before. They obviously look a bit more like real-life animals than the Hollows ever did in Bleach, and I think they just look, a lot of them just look really, really cool. I especially love the little dragon broomsticks that Noel and Ninny, and I assume basically just the witches and wizards in general, all used to get around on. They have really derpy faces, and I think they look really, really cool. I like those guys a lot. But anyway, Noel tries to get this Budbuck, and it tries to use a magic spell on her, and that causes its antlers to bloom. And then that gets the attention of another bigger dragon, which Noel then has to fight off. And it's here we find out that the witches and wizards of Wingbind can use magical spells, very similar to Kido in Execution. One of them even has a chant that she uses, which is really, really cool. Big Kido flashbacks, which I love. Obviously, they are witches and wizards, so them having magical spells makes complete sense. The spell Noel uses to subdue the new dragon is actually called Spell 31 Blue Spark, and it seems to sort of hit it in the face with like a big, presumably blue, almost like a star-shaped thing, which then detonates on its face. The dragon then tries to fly away, and its wing beat causes Noel and the Budbuck to go absolutely flying, but Ninny arrives late to the operation using Spell 44 Flash Bumper, basically a big net to catch Noel and save her. Like I said, there's a lot of new terminology in this chapter. The only one I'm not entirely sure on so far is the word umbrella. So Ninny says to Noel that she has seniority over her and she is known as second umbrella, whereas Noel is first umbrella. So I'm assuming, my guess is it's like a reverse version of the seats in Bleach. So, you know, you had obviously the seated officers. I'm assuming that first seat could even be the lowest, which is Noel, and then second seat, and it goes up to however many, which would imply that these two are at the very bottom rung of the Piper's division. I'm assuming all divisions have umbrellas. I could be completely wrong, we don't really know enough yet, but if so, then these guys are at the very bottom rung of the division. So that's kind of interesting. That's what I think umbrellas means. If you guys have a better idea, let me know in the comments below, because for now that's the main terminology. I'm not too sure on. The rest of it's not too bad. There's just loads of different division names. Again, it's very similar structurally. Wingbind appears to be very similar structurally to the Gotei 13, which does make things a bit easier for us, although there are some slight differences here and there. But yeah, again, we can get into that later on. So, like, I liked this bit. I liked seeing the different spells being utilised. But again, if you've read the one-shot, it was very similar to them going out and harvesting dragons in that as well. And I know Kubo wants to build up an idea of the mundane. Like, this is their lifestyle, that's their main job, that's their role. But considering, again, the limited nature of this series, I would maybe like him to spend time on other things. The exposition we get after that chapter about London and the dragons, I'm pretty sure is ripped exactly from the one-shot. It's even the same imagery used, I think. Which again implies to me that this is intended to replace that one-shot, but then it does follow on from it. So that's a bit confusing. But regardless, we do get more exposition again about how the world works in this new universe. We find out that the reason witches and wizards take on jobs like this is so that they can get both money and apparently achievement points. I'm not entirely sure what that means, unless that like leads you towards a promotion, perhaps, the more achievement points you get. And they get their rewards from essentially like a bank machine with a really cool like pound symbol on it that's been slightly changed up a bit for reverse London, which, you know, again, I really like. The little details like that are really nice. Noel and Ninny have like a nice little back and forth argument here about the reasons for them taking on these jobs and the fact that Noel left Ninny behind under the pretense that Ninny was late, but actually Noel just wanted the reward all for herself. However, an explosion then goes off in the middle of London, and it turns out Balgo is having some trouble looking after Oh Sushi-chan. The dog has sprouted wings and is just taking off in midair, and the stuff with Balgo is fine. It's kind of typical Kubo humour. It lasts for oftentimes a little bit too long for my liking, especially again as the pages are so limited, but it's absolutely fine. We then get to see Billy Banks Jr., who in my opinion is still the coolest looking character in the series, although some of the dudes later on might have him beat. And this is where the chapter actually does show some kind of continuity between this and the one-shot. At the end of the one-shot, Billy Banks Jr. was promoted to the Sabres division, which is essentially Ninny's goal as well, which I always thought was kind of interesting because I thought he was supposed to be like their chief in the Pipers division, but He's then moved on since then. So again, that begs the question, is there a hierarchy between the individual divisions? Because you would assume being promoted to the Sabres division sounds like it's better than the Pipers one, but maybe it's just a change in job role and all the divisions are the same. I don't really know. It doesn't matter either way because Billy Banks Jr. has been demoted now, apparently, something they actually bring up. He caused some problems. He didn't actually do any work, apparently. Kind of begs the question why Kubo bothered to do that. My assumption is he decided he wanted to drop a little hint about the Sabres division at the end of the one-shot, but decided in this chapter, actually, I don't want Billy to be a part of that anymore. So he just pushed him back down to Pipers. So that's an interesting bit of continuity. Again, though, it doesn't really matter if you hadn't read the one shot, but, as I had, it was kind of nice to see. Now, this next section honestly kind of confused me just a little bit. So Kubo mentions earlier on that people who live in front London can't see the dragons. And that obviously makes complete sense. They can't see the beasts because they're going about their normal lives. They live in you and I's world. Only people in reverse London can see them, and only witches and wizards who have passed the Wingbind test can actually come into contact with these dragons. However, as Balgo is flying through the sky with Osushi, he's running into, I assume, his friend. They accidentally smash into this guy's wall and create a big hole. And the guy seems to know everything about this world. He knows about the fact that if he comes into contact with this dragon, he could go to prison. And that's kind of weird to me. So can he see the dragon? He can see the dog, because I think the dog is meant to be part dragon. In that it sprouts wings, but at the same time I think it looks like a normal dog. So I'm not entirely sure. That was a little bit confusing to me. I think maybe he just looks like a normal dog, but I wasn't sure if they were in front London or if they were in reverse London at this point. Because I think they're supposed to be in reverse London, because Noel and Ninny goes into the floor at the start of the chapter. You see why I'm getting a bit confused here? So Ninny goes into the floor at the start of the chapter, sees the explosion outside, which I assume is in the same place, but maybe not. It doesn't really matter. But either way, that was a little bit confusing, because this regular human, who appears to be Balgo's friend, knows everything about it. And then Noel kind of quizzes him on whether or not he actually came into contact with the dragon. He had to lick her phone, which was kind of weird. But basically, if you come into contact with dragons, you get almost poisoned with this thing called a Drago toxin, which I thought was a really cool name. And if you have too much of that in it, you can become what's known as dragon-clad. Now, apparently the normal punishment for that is either 120 years in prison or execution, which to me seems really harsh, especially when most humans probably don't actually mean to come into contact with these dragons. And it kind of begged the question to me as well, why didn't Balgo suffer from any of these punishments? Because he is a dragon-clad, he became... But I remember they originally called it a were-dragon, but Dragon-clad is definitely a better name in the main series. So that kind of was pretty interesting as well, I thought. Anyway, you find out that one of the main things about dragon-clad people, so again, people that have become essentially poisoned by dragons and almost become half-dragon themselves, is that they tend to attract dragons to them, and they attract danger to them, which is why Osushi sprouted wings in the first place, to try and get Balgo out of trouble, and end up fighting this big, pretty weird-looking dragon in the middle of the street. One thing I did really like about this was their kind of yellow and black tape, again, very commonly used by police in this country to cordon off areas. I really love that they just have this tape on them that says keep out witches and wizards, and they then use it to cordon off the area. Noel then uses spell number 4, Stun Ball, to paralyze the dragon. However, it slips out of its own skin, which I thought was really kind of actually pretty cool. And reveals itself to be a dark dragon that's missing its face. Again, Kubo getting really creative with these enemy designs here. But the dark dragon then, tries to devour Balgo, because apparently dark dragons are essentially hollows. To really boil it down, dragons are pluses, and then they can become dark dragons, which is essentially hollows, because dragons feed off of the energy and the emotions of humans, and too much negative energy can turn you into a dark dragon, which gives you a fascination with and a desire to devour humankind. So very similar again to hollows. In the one shot, Ninny even mentions that they indiscriminately destroy them in Japan, again referencing hollows and Shinigami. So that was really interesting to see. So the Dark Dragon attempts to attack them, and again, like I said, the art is really on point here in this chapter. I love the water effects that Kubo creates when the fire hydrant is destroyed. That's just really, really nice stuff. Anyway, Noel tries to call in help from Sabers because it is a Dark Dragon in the middle of reverse London. That's like really bad news. But Ninny hangs up and says, if we can kill this thing, we could get really recognised and, get maybe a promotion to Sabers because that's what Ninny's after, although Noel apparently doesn't want that anyway. So then they try and fight this big dark dragon themselves, and Noel uses a really awesome looking spell. As she pulls out this spell, which is known as Spell 75, it creates a big ring of energy around her and these like dagger looking things that you presume are going to fire off and hit the dark dragon. However, you don't get to see how that fight plays out because the chapter transitions to easily the most interesting part of the story right at the end, unfortunately. But we finally get introduced to a ton of new characters, and this is where it feels the most like Bleach to me. I don't want Burn the Witch to be an exact Bleach ripoff, however, this really did remind me of Bleach, and I had a big grin on my face when I was reading this part because these new characters all look really awesome. So we then discover that the fight is actually being monitored by a really shadowy looking group of individuals sitting around a big table, and these guys have a really cool title, which is the Wingbind Supreme Powers That Be Top of Horns. That's just a really, really cool name for a group of characters that are really interesting to look at and all have completely unique looking designs, even compared to some characters in Bleach. So let's get into these guys now. So again, when I said earlier that there's a lot of terminology in this chapter, this is what I was referring to. And yeah, there's a lot going on here with these guys. So let's reel these guys off one by one. First, we have Bruno Bangknife, who is a member of the Magic Circle Corps Inks. This guy looks so much like Bazby. It's not even funny, but like he's clearly the hothead of whatever this group is. Maybe this group is meant to be like the captains, again, if we're equating it to the Gotei 13. And this is like a captain's meeting, or they could be like the Central 46 or something like that. However, considering I'm assuming these guys are the heads of all these individual divisions, I would be more akin to say they're a bit like the captains. However, they are painted almost like villains here, which I find to be really interesting. Anyway, let's go on with the rest of these guys. So we've also got Roy B. Dipper of the Incantation Corps Anthems. My guess is that these guys are probably going to be really, really good with those spells, if we ever get to see them do anything. Next, we have the head of the Liturgy Corps Sacreds. And this character's name, I'm not sure if this is a mistranslation, but I'm not sure I can pronounce it how I think it's pronounced without getting demonetized on the channel. So I'm going to call her Count Naya Milive. She kind of looks like a fairy tale character, to be honest. But again, really cool design. And so far, Roy B. Dipper and Count Naya don't have like designs we've ever really seen before in Bleach. I do think Bruno looks a bit like Bazby, but other than that, so far, we're looking really good. Next up, we have the head of Ninny and Noel's corps, the Minstrel Corps Pipers. And I'm assuming these guys are going to be musical somehow. The guy's name is Trombone Takinen, which again is just such a Kubo name. It's unreal. But I'm assuming the Pipers division is literally musical if they're the Minstrel Corps and the guy's got trombone for his name and stuff like that. I'm assuming they're going to be musical somehow. Maybe that's the actual pipes they're blowing. There's so many questions here. The introduction of all of these characters is the reason I think that this story should go on longer than it is doing. Next up, we have one of the coolest looking characters in the group, Sullivan Squire, the head of the Tactical Corps Sabers. So Sabers are clearly going to be like the absolute badass group, I reckon. We know, as long as Kubo kept the design from the one shot, that they have these badass capes on, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of this guy. We then get the Development Corps Patchworks, and its leader is Saka Rin, who actually hasn't turned up today. My assumption straight off the bat, this reminded me of Mayuri. I'm assuming that's what it is. The head of the development group, Patchworks, they're clearly some kind of Frankenstein thing going on here, perhaps. The fact they haven't bothered to show up as well implies they think they've got something better to do. Very Mayuri-esque is what I'm expecting from this character. And again, Kubo is building mystery with this guy. Are we going to find out who they are in 4 chapters? I really hope there's more of this story, because so far I'm loving these designs. And finally, we have a guy called Harry Shake, who is the leader of the Accounting Corps billionaires, which is just a fantastic name for your accounting group. But basically these guys are discussing the fact that a dark dragon has shown up for the first time in nearly a century in Reverse London, and that is a real catastrophe and they need to do something about it. Essentially, Bruno is arguing that the dragon-clad Balgo should never have been allowed to be let loose in the first place. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. It's strange that Balgo wasn't subjected to the same punishments apparently most dragon-clad characters are. Then we get to see probably the coolest looking character out of these guys so far, who's apparently, I think, probably going to be the head of all of them. But apparently, at least at the very least, sounds like he's the head of some kind of judgment division or justice division. And this guy's title is a bit of a mouthful, but he is the head of the Personnel Affairs Divine Punishment Corps, the Gallows, Wolfgang Slashhout. And he looks really, really cool. He kind of looks like a really angry younger Yamamoto mixed with Giriko and Robert Akutrone. He just looks like a real badass to me, and I'm, again, so excited to see this guy hopefully do something in this story. But the chapter ends with Wolfgang letting the others know that yes, this has come up in his own division numerous times since Balgo became a dragonclad, and it can no longer go unpunished. And so he basically puts out the order to have Balgo executed. And that's the end of the first chapter of Burn the Witch. Whew, that was quite a lot to go over there, but we had quite a bit to talk about, from the plot to the overall design, tone, characters, all that sort of thing. So what did I think of the first chapter of Kubo's new limited run series? Well, I liked it a lot. I'm really excited to explore this brand new world that he's created, especially these awesome new characters at the end, which really, really remind me of the captains of the Gotei 13. It's just amazing that after so long, Kubo can create, what was it, like, is that 10 brand new characters that are all visually completely distinct from one another? And we also have the seeds of a brand new plot being sown. Balgo is going to be hunted down by these guys and killed because he is dangerous and he can't keep himself under control, and Ninny and Noel, who are supposed to be looking after him, apparently can't do that either. It frustrates me a little bit that this chapter is in many ways very similar to that one-shot chapter. We spend quite a bit of time getting the same exposition about Reverse London, about dragons. We see Noel and Ninny doing the same stuff, working with dragons that we have done before. And I get it, it needs to be established to make the world feel real, but I just really hope that there is the potential for this to become a longer series in the future to really get the most out of this new world, out of Wingbind, and out of all the really cool, colourful new characters that we have seen so far. We've got a week to go until the next chapter of Burn the Witch, and apparently we'll be halfway through the series at that point. And I think next chapter is about 20 pages shorter than this one, which is crazy. But so far, like I said, I'm really enjoying it. I am pretty captivated by the new world, by the new characters, especially at the end. That ending was so good. I was kind of feeling a little bit like, been there, done that, because I've read the pilot chapter previously with Balgo's antics and all that sort of thing. It really made up for it at the end there with those new characters. I absolutely loved that scene. So let me know in the comments below, guys. What I want to know from you this week is which of these guys, which of the top of Horns is your favourite so far, just based on their appearance. I really do like the look of Wolfgang. He looks really badass, but I also think that Harry Shake character's got a lot of potential too. But my favourite probably is Sullivan Squire of the Sabres, but really they all look fantastic so far. I think they all look really, really cool, and I just can't wait to see more. If I had to rate the chapter, guys, it gets a 3.5 out of 5 for me. Treads a lot of familiar ground, but hopefully is building to something really exciting with these new characters, and I just really hope that there's more in store for Burn the Witch after this. But that's it for this chapter review of Burn the Witch, guys. Sorry it went on a bit long, but this was an ultra-long chapter, and I hope I covered as much as I possibly could. Let me know in the comments below, like I said, what you thought of the chapter as well, and if you're excited to read more from the Burn the Witch series. But until next time, guys, I shall catch you later. Make sure you have subscribed if you haven't done that already. I'd really appreciate the support. But yeah, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.